Now, the Democratic Alliance says there are answers from President Cyril Ramaphosa regarding the cost of the peace mission to Ukraine and Russia, calling on for accountability after extra security personnel and journalists had to be flown there, and now we learned they've abandoned their trip in Poland as documents were allegedly not in order. Let's unpack this further. We have DAMP Louise, Powell, as well as the University of Johannesburg Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversations, Professor Siphamandla, Zondi. Good to have you both, and thank you very much for your time. Prof. Zondi, I suppose, when I look at it, there are two issues. One, there is the African Leaders Peace Mission, which in itself and its impact, we can have a conversation about the role that South Africa would have wanted to play there and whether they were able to exert enough of the pressure. But then there is also this impasse that was playing on the sidelines happening in Poland, which the president's spokesperson calls deeply regrettable. I think is the words that he uses. Deeply unfortunate and deeply regrettable is the impasse. Maybe let's start there, and then we'll circle around and come back to the peace mission itself. Either we are to believe that South Africa, out of its own accord, they fill the plane with lots of guns, others being used in a serious war, and added a whole lot of extra people onto a plane that was chartered, and it flew, and they wanted to land this plane in Poland, which in itself would say South Africa is truly out of touch with the concepts of rules and regulations. Could something as hectic as that happen to compromise this historic moment that I suppose the president has been building to? Prof?
I guess as an analyst, I was able to answer your broader question that you answered earlier, and I'm unable to answer this one for one simple reason. I must rely on the facts you are putting on for me. You are saying that on that plane there was a whole lot of people who were not documented who were in it. And secondly, you are saying, for sure that there were also equipment that was there that was improper on staff. I must just ask, what is the source of that data? So that I'm able to answer it fully. Do we know for sure? Where does it come from? Because the journalist that reported it was the Peter Dutoit, actually from News 24, and he says apparently, it seems, speculated himself. The danger with it is that it might turn out that all the facts that we base our analysis on is incorrect.
Yeah.
And then we might be reckless in that we discuss what is incorrect. What I can't discuss is the importance of that peace initiative.
Yes.
But I can also discuss the importance of reporting about it and the importance of the rumors of that, because at the center of this war has been what we call information warfare.
Right.
A big fight for control of public opinion, which is very normal in international relations.
Right.
That can be based on facts, but it can also be based on propaganda. Yeah. And that information warfare is a very important tool. Let's take that international warfare. Let's say we give Mr. Dutoit the benefit of the doubt in terms of, I see also the Sunday Times reporting on this particular matter, and say indeed there were these weapons and indeed there were these extra personnel that were not permitted to be there. Does it justify the treatment that was received by the journalists in Poland who were also stuck on that plane for 26 hours or so, in that interest of that information warfare? We simply just do not know why the whole team, the second plane, was stuck in Poland, except what is quoted from unknown sources. It's just unfortunate that in this day and age, democratic states, first South Africa is a democratic state. It needs to be upfront and say this was the actual thing that happened. It began here. This is what the Polish said and stuff like that. Secondly, Poland, the respected democracy, just did not issue any information, any statement. It makes you suspicious when democracies don't communicate, that perhaps this might be a mind game and a political game. Remember Poland's position. There are two positions on how you resolve the issue in Ukraine. The one position is that you need military means to do that. Just pumping weapons. It's been happening since February, since March 2022. That was one strategy. It has not produced the results in over 15 months. The second strategy, which is what the African leaders were pushing now, is that you can solve this via peace negotiation. Of course, if Poland is not compatible with this rule, it's possible that it is part of the political game. It's fair in international politics that you play political games on this thing. All sorts of possibilities are there because we simply do not have a statement from Portugal. We don't have a statement from South Africa. And we therefore may be looking for a black cat in the dark.
Yeah. Emma, that's precisely the challenge, isn't it? At this point, we've got no official statement. Maybe you do, as the Democratic Alliance, from government as to exactly what has led to this impasse that we are seeing playing out. But, of course, this has led you to ask a number of questions. First and foremost is, who's sponsoring this African leaders' peace mission to Russia, Ukraine? Emma?
Yes, well, evening. Thanks for having me. So Poland, in fact, did issue a media statement, and it's been widely publicized on Twitter. And essentially in their media statement, they had said that the concerns and the standoff did relate to 13 crates of weapons. What we know from journalists who were on board the plane is that essentially there were more than 100 officers, 11 of South Africa's very best journalists. And we know a number of things that have been established also from internal individuals who were tracking flight paths and who were receiving information from that flight. Now, we know that the plane was flying into a war zone. And from numerous media reports, it seems that despite 3 logistical meetings that had been held between the South African authorities and the Polish authorities ahead of the trip, it seems that according to the Polish authorities, the South African government had still failed to conduct the necessary due diligence and to ensure that we had the correct clearances and permits. We also know that following the aircraft landing in Poland, that country sent a diplomatic message to South Africa warning that the aircraft was carrying additional crates of unauthorized and undeclared arms. Yeah. And apparently, according to that same information, the aircraft was also carrying undeclared persons or personnel. Now, the Sunday Times has today, as you referenced, reported that the arms included long-range sniper rifles and weapons that are traditionally used in conflicts. We also know, and we can corroborate this from internationally available flight data, that Estonia refused overnight clearance for the aircraft, which is why it couldn't leave Poland, and that there were also other airspace restrictions for the flight route to Russia from Poland, which included Hungarian airspace. We also know that the plane had been flagged over the Mediterranean. It had to circle 6 times, and it had to obtain clearance from Italy before resuming its route, presumably, and this is the key question, presumably, not an ascertained fact, but presumably because this hadn't been cleared prior to departure.
And what do we know about clearances as far as Russia is concerned? Was the plane allowed to at least given clearance to land in Russia?
I can't answer that question. My understanding from reports that I've read and journalists that I've spoken to with first-hand information is that it was not so much an issue in terms of being given clearance to land in Russia, but rather because it is a war zone and there are sanctions and restrictions in terms of airspace, that it was an airspace issue in terms of the route from Poland to Russia, but that is not something that I'm in a position to confirm.
So could you agree with Prof. Zondi that this could be playing in the geopolitical space and those politics that are playing out there in terms of how this matter of South Africa flying over those airspaces was handled?
Absolutely. I think that it's always key to corroborate and to fact-check information. We do, as the professor says, we do live in a world of misinformation and disinformation, and that's why I think that one of the gold standards of journalism is to corroborate with 2 or more sources, which is what has been done in regards to the information that we certainly are able to convey. There are, however, a lot more questions that need to be asked, and you will have noted that our federal leader released a media media statement last night outlining some of the steps and the actions that the Democratic Alliance is going to be taking via official parliamentary channels to get the full facts of this matter. And I'd be happy to outline what some of those questions
are. So let's talk about, like, in terms of steps and action. President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, offered this idea of a proposed African leaders peace mission a long time ago. It's not something that just popped up now and he decided to fly over there over this weekend. What are the steps and processes that would have been necessary, I suppose, in that particular instance to process something like this from South Africa's side if we are talking proper governance?
Well, I think that this mission has been in planning for quite a long time. We also know that the date of this mission has had to be moved. I believe that the original date for the mission was from the 28th of May, and there were logistical issues. I think that we need to understand what the objectives are in terms of this peace mission. The Ukrainian President Zelensky has been very clear, and he outlined recently at the G7 summit that Zelensky's got a 10-point peace plan. It's been widely accepted by Western and NATO allied powers, and Zelensky has been very clear that no peace agreement can be reached until Russia have withdrawn their troops from all occupied territory. And I think that that's the key starting point. So this mediation agreement or this proposed mediation agreement was never going to be successful in the context of the African leaders merely calling for a ceasefire of hostilities, given that the Ukrainians have been very clear with the international community that mediation and negotiation will not take place until such time as Russian troops have withdrawn. We also know that according to the Zelensky peace plan, the Ukrainians are demanding a release of all prisoners and deportees, war prisoners, and a return of children that had been allegedly deported to Russia. They also want the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and for Russia to reaffirm its commitment according to the United Nations. So I think that President Ramaphosa and the other African leaders going in there, the intention, it was I think noble intentions. However, the plan was always bound to fail unless those leaders were to call on Putin to withdraw his troops as a starting point.
All right. Back live with you tonight. Still with us, DAMPM Louise Powell and UJ Professor Siphamandla Zondi. Well, there you have it, Prof. It seems so far, at least, we've got communication from the Polish government, which says the South African plane was carrying at least 13 crates of uncleared and unsafe goods, or undeclared and unsafe goods. So it seems, and we've got confirmation from a number of airspaces that South Africa was not permitted to fly into those spaces. When you look at that particular region, does South Africa have past relations with that region, and how were those relations?
Of course, Emma and her team in Parliament have to ask South African government to give its side of the story. Because again, getting a statement from one side should never be an absolute truth. I can never bet my life on one statement uncorroborated. So they need to ask the tough question. Did they break any protocol? Because there are relations between Portugal and South Africa, Poland and South Africa. Did they follow all the procedures? What went wrong? Was there foul play on the South African side? Was there foul play on the Polish side? Only after that parliamentary quiz that we hope they will do, I can form derivative here. I'm an analyst, and I really am not a campaigner, so I can't be basing it on loose rumors and half facts and stuff like that. But if it is, there's two possibilities. It might suggest that there has been failure in the administration of the entire trip, preparation of the trip, especially for the second plane. Because the first plane did go, land, everything was okay. But for the second plane, which was carrying journalists and others, it might be maybe one or two journalists or some government official was not registered properly. Certain mistakes, and then I hope that there will be consequences of that, because it would have put South Africa into disrepute. And I hope that this also will not harm further the relationship between Portugal, Poland and South Africa. Under normal circumstances, have a situation of this nature. There's such a sound relationship between the two countries, which goes back to 1995, that would have helped resolve this thing without all the specter and all this drama and all the things that have happened. Not that. There are two categories of countries in the world. We have countries that are called partners, which is countries that we have transactional relationship with, which is need things from each other, and then we have an ally, which means it's a closer relationship. In a closer relationship, even an issue of this nature, they would have dealt with it on the sideline. This might signal that there is a bit of a difficult relationship between South Africa and Poland. It might be over other things, but it might also be over Ukraine issue. But Portugal feels very strongly that the only way out of the war is a military victory for Zelensky. Pretty much Zelensky's peace plan is about victory. In other words, that give us victory, then there will be end of this conflict. Because to say you must, there are two sides to the war. This side must do 1, 2, 3, 10 things. No, we are doing nothing. Nobody else does anything. Is to say, give us the victory. Then that will be the basis of war. That's a fair one. It's a fair view. But the view that the African countries were putting it there is that it never worked that way. All conflicts are resolved through negotiation, where you put those 10 points on the negotiation table, the other side put their 2 points, then you resolve the issues, you end the conflict. That is how the world has learned to do it since 1945. It's the most successful approach to ending conflict. It's also in line with the UN Charter. Just as the principle of respect of the territorial sovereignty, including sovereignty of Ukraine, is sacrosanct. It's very important. The principle of peaceful settlement of conflict is also a principle in the same article of the UN Charter. We need to commit to both of them in order to get peace if we are to learn from the history of the past 40 years. But, of course, there are administrative issues that I think the members of the opposition need to probe very strongly in Parliament that have to be resolved, because we can't allow inefficiency to creep in anywhere.
Let's analyze a statement by the head of the Presidential Security Service, Wally Ruot. He says, this is why they're doing this. I want you to see that when we started to open the packages, they wanted to rush to confiscate our firearms. And that is why we have to put it back, right? And he says, now they say that we don't have permits. We have permits. The only difference is that they are saying we cannot bring a copy of a permit. We must bring the original. All of a sudden, we must have permits and are putting the life of our president in jeopardy because we could have been in Kiev this afternoon already. That's his exact words as he was being filmed out there. Just analyze for me what he's saying there as the head of the Presidential Protection Services.
It's basically saying that there is a disagreement on mere administrative things. And that mere administrative thing is the difference between a permit and a copy of the permit. And the Polish are saying they need a permit. And he's saying they brought the proper permit. I think in the parliamentary probe, the DA would be right to say, why did you not bring? Then they would say whether it is standard practice or it is not standard practice, or whether it was explained or not explained, and all of them. But also the Polish know, because it's a government to government, they will know whether they are permits or not permits.
Yes.
But when they say that it's dangerous goods there and not there, then there are things that were not under permit. It's going to be very hard for us to establish who's telling the truth, because governments don't always tell the truth all the time. Polish government, South African government, they can all manage this because it's a realm of politics about big geopolitical things where we are trying to project certain power and manage public opinion in South Africa or elsewhere in the world. It's a difficult one.
So, Emma, what we do know for sure is that from Wally Road, at least, they had a copy of a permit of some sort to bring that particular extra cargo onto Poland, as far as he is claiming. Now, it's not the first time that the Presidential Protection Service would be flying internationally. They would have done this before and they would know whether they are permitted to fly with a copy or not. Why would this time they choose to fly with a copy if it's not permitted?
Well, all we have to go on at present before our parliamentary questions are responded to are the media reports and the communications via social media from journalists who were on board that plane. Now, these aren't just sort of very low-ranking journalists. These are some of the best investigative journalists that we have in the country. And according to those media reports, the PPS head, Wally Roda, was warned that his operation didn't have the correct paperwork for their weapons. And apparently, according to those same media reports from journalists on the plane, that was ignored. It is also inconceivable that as the head of the Presidential Protection Services, Wally Roda turned around and accused the Polish government of racism and accused the Polish government of saying that they had sabotaged the peace mission. Now, there is war on the doorstep of Poland, and we understand the history, the very sensitive history of Poland from World War II. South Africa has, in recent weeks, been accused of actively supplying the Russian Federation with arms. We then arrive with an aircraft full of crates of weapons, and apparently those crates don't have the correct permits. I think that on the basis of what we know and what we know may change, that the Polish authorities were well within their rights to have not been particularly friendly, nor to have been particularly welcoming of a bunch of South African presidential protection officers and elite police officers who, according to the Sunday Times, had crates of long-range weapons. Now, I think that it's also just quite important to say that in the context of what Prof had said about fake news, that this happened at the same time that the president's spokesperson was in Kiev whilst Russia had fired 6 Kinzhal ballistic and 6 Caliber cruise missiles into Kiev. Yeah. The president's spokesperson then denied that this had happened, despite Reuters and eyewitness accounts from international media houses across the world. The president's spokesperson denied that there were missile strikes on Kiev at the time, saying that they were unaware. So I don't think that South Africa is doing, or the ANC-run government of South Africa is doing a very good job of ensuring that South Africa has got a reputation as a credible mediator in this conflict. And I think that I'm pro-South Africa. I believe that South Africa and South Africans must come first. But I don't believe that the Polish were necessarily out of bounds to have been potentially suspicious or antagonistic towards the plane that landed full of weapons.
So Vincent Magwenya, on that particular question, he was just having an exchange with Clive Simpkins, it seems, on Twitter about that. He says, Clive, I didn't deny anything. All I said was, and I still say it, despite the insults and the vitriolic responses aimed at me, I did not hear any explosives or see any missile or heard any siren. I was not in a shelter or bunker.
So I read that exchange on Twitter earlier today, and I went back to Vincent's original tweets. Vincent, in his original tweet, went on to say that the reports were potentially as a result of disinformation and of fake news. I think that there was a little bit of backpedaling going on in respect of the engagement that happened later on Clive's Twitter. But Vincent's original Twitter went further to say that he believed that the reports were in fact fake news. He also only later admitted that the presidents had in fact, or some of the presidents and their delegations had in fact at that very time been in the bomb shelter. So whether or not it was just an egregious error and mistake, a regrettable error on Vincent's part, I think that we need to be generous and give individuals the benefit of the doubt where that is fair to do. And perhaps it was just an egregious and potentially ignorant tweet. But he is the president's spokesperson. He was there on official business funded by the South African taxpayer. And I think that it was deeply misguided for him to have tweeted that in the context of the incredible and enormous suffering of the Ukrainian people that has been going on now since February at the hands of Russian imperialists.
Prof, as we wrap up, others have been asking this question. What is the strategic thrust of this intervention of the African leaders' peace missions? Just an opportunity for a photograph with Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky? Or is there something that this mission can actually achieve?
All conflicts, all major conflicts end on two bases. A military solution is found which has support. Almost the entire Western nation and a big part of the South African side believe there must be a military victory, that Ukraine must militarily prevail. That will end the conflict. It's fair. Some conflicts, very few of them, have ended in a military victory. The second view, which is held by a vast majority of countries in the world, if you look at the votes at the United Nations Security Council, the vast majority held this view that the UN principle of a peaceful settlement of conflict is the most successful principle in ending all the conflicts since 1945. So those two views, you can't say one is evil, one is good, and all that. They are just different views. One of those views must prevail. But it just depends on what cost you want to take for a particular view to prevail. So what the African are doing, which has historical position of countries of the South, the historical position of countries of the North, by the way, is war. The historical position of countries of the South is that all global conflict must be resolved through diplomacy, through negotiation, even with the worst of enemy. In South Africa, we also negotiated with a terrible enemy. The negotiations started, by the way, the first contacts, like what the Africans are doing, started in 1984. There were bad contacts that started. And then there were delegations of the South African businesses who were concerned about the thing. Did not care who win, but they wanted South Africa to win, so they said, find a statement. 1987. But the negotiations actually happened in 1991. Now, you will judge this initiative not on what it achieved this weekend, but what it achieves when the war ends in the end, whether it will be a peaceful end to the war or it will be a military victory for any side. Because, by the way, military victory can be for Russia or can be for Ukraine. Whichever way it happens, such victories are Pyrrhic because they are overrun. A big part of Ukraine is devastated.
Yeah.
And there are those who hold the view that you must just continue this devastation. More lives die to just for some moral victory of some form. Either of these positions, and I think history would be on the side of the Africans, given what we've seen over the last 70 years, that there will in the end be a sit-down between Ukraine and Russia, perhaps supported by the United States and NATO and others backing up, that will end this conflict. I would bet my head on this, like the U.S. ambassador bet his head on
the guns in Simonstown.
Importing arms.
I thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's leave it there. Professor Siphamandla Zondi and MP for the Democratic Alliance on International Relations, Louise Powell. There.